Hello, community, and welcome back to Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita. I am your host, Dr. Anita Wilson, C-Suite Trusted Advisor, Board Director, and Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategy Consultant, helping members of the C-Suite and their teams reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. We are back with the third in our series of real conversations from the C-Suite with Dr. Deena Brown. Dr. Deena, it's wonderful to have you with us. And community, if you weren't here last time, you missed out on some proprietary information that you get to be privy to. So go back and listen to the previous podcast. Dr. Deena, how you doing today?
I am doing amazing. Always loving to be here.
Thank you so much for coming back. So in this third conversation, we've been kind of looking at the 4th of July and independence in a different way, and particularly independence of thought. And in our first conversation, we kind of talked about what that means in terms of how we see ourselves in the workforce. In the second conversation, we were talking about what's the why not that more organizations are not getting on the bandwagon with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you have encouraged us to get away from the acronym and say the words and bring the power to the conversation. So in this conversation, I would like to get some more thoughts about you about what we can do to respect every representation of diversity in the workforce moving forward. How can we do that?
Strategically.
Yeah.
Intentionally.
Yes.
To anchor the other things to share through this and kind of tying into what the kickoff was to the conversation, I want to highlight a segment of Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July."
Yes.
And share this portion of you because when we think about the impact of the power of those words and speak to what we can begin to do, that is a wonderful grounding start. So let me share this portion with you. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all of your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombastic fraud, deception, impropriety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. This is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shockingly and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Frederick Douglass, July 5th, 1852. Whew.
Yeah.
I was reading that in preparation for this conversation. Are we still there? No. So I'm level set that no. But if we look at today's headlines, is there anything that's resonating? When we think about what happened at UCLA's campus, USC's campus, graduations, parents have waited, paid good money, and proud of children whose graduations, commencement ceremonies were actually cut because of concerns or fears in relation to injustices that may occur.
Mm.
How do we actually begin to tackle this? First and foremost, we have to make the unconscious conscious so it stops controlling our life and us calling it fate.
Mm-hmm.
And actually have these critical conversations that are different to begin to set the roadmap and the blueprint with clarity instead of using smoke and mirrors. I think that we hide behind our bigotry and our biases. I say a collective we, not any one particular group or person, and that we shy away from these difficult conversations instead of, like you say, they are different, but the only way to get through them is to begin to have them so that we can level set on where are you, where am I, and where do we have the opportunity to link and sync in the middle to start actioning next steps.
When you mentioned that we must have these difficult conversations, people don't want to have them because people don't like pain. And that's just human nature. We do not like pain.
Mm-hmm.
But what comes to mind is something that has just been kind of turning over in my soul for the past week, based on a situation I heard about, is that when someone else's intelligence exposes someone else's ignorance, that can be met in one of two ways: either with appreciation, because now their awareness has been raised, or with apprehension about the fact that you knew something that either I didn't know or I chose not to acknowledge. And we cannot, I have a very good friend who's a psychiatrist, and she says, we need to remember that we cannot control other people's teeth, their thoughts, their emotions, and their actions. So when one person's intelligence exposes the other person's ignorance, and not to be detrimental to the other person, it just is what it is. I'm sharing something with you that you didn't know. How are you going to handle it? And that's part of the reason I think that some of these conversations are still seen as difficult, because they're painful, because it exposes our ignorance, to your point about the collective our collective ignorance. What do you think about that?
I would push back on that. It's all about power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are not familiar, go check out the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene. And that, yes, there's pain involved within the power piece. And it's really control dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if I feel like I'm losing control positioning in my power because you are gaining some share of that, then I'm feeling pain. So I don't think that they're disconnected. I think they're interwoven, but it's still rooted at power.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is about who controls, who owns the power, and not wanting to have shared power. Isn't that why the whole separation with the states between the national and the states, right? I mean, it was about power. And I think that until we start calling it what it is, we won't get there. So even now, with why is the language shifting? Why are people upset? Because there is a group who has been empowered for generations, feeling like they are losing power with new generations.
Mm-hmm.
They want to take it back. So the only reason there's issues, not the only reason, the primary reason there's issues with some of the current DEI strategies, because they're working.
Mm-hmm.
They're working.
But they're working for the benefit of the organization. There's still that pushback.
Okay, this is not about the organization. It's about me, my own identity.
Say that
It's my
again.
ego.
Community, turn up your volume. Please say that again.
It's about me, my identity. And this is where I challenge my leaders to not let your ego get in the way of your excellence.
Yes.
And when you realize that this is not about an organizational innovation or impact, because the research shows you.
Mm-hmm.
Go check out Accenture, Catalyst, McKinsey, Gartner, everybody's research says when you have women on boards, when you have diversity of thought, you have diverse populations, you have an increase in innovation, productivity, and profits.
Yes.
So if that is true and the data supports that, then why do you have a problem? It's a you problem, because you're not connected and want to be about a we system. And if you look at the word power, just this part, look at the word power, POWER. We sits in the middle of that. And in the core part, the OWE, what do I owe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What will I owe? What do I have to pay in order to shift to that we? Tied into the power.
And what you just said about the individual ego getting in the way goes back to the question that I posed in our second conversation. What is your why not? And you just hit the nail on the head with that.
Mm-hmm.
You just answered that question that I have been asking in different ways for about a year now. You just hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah. But isn't that what a bias is? And so I asked the question in my TED Talk about, we talk a lot about unconscious bias, but what about conscious bias?
Yes. Nobody wants to go there.
Which is more prevalent than unconscious bias. And so I asked as a final question in my TED Talk, what will you do? How will you lead when your unconscious bias becomes conscious? Now talk to me. Out there, we had this conversation. You now know. Now let me see what you do, what actions that you take, because it's not unconscious anymore. Now explain it, why we're not moving in the direction that you say that you support it.
And that goes back to the individual ego.
Yes.
Incredible. Wow. I just love how you just pull things together. No, I do. I love how you pull things together. We know subconsciously that organizations are made up of people. We know this. And depending on who's at the top, that's the direction that the organization takes. Not to say that the problems in organizations are the CEO's fault. Mm-hmm. However, we do have to acknowledge that the tone at the top dictates how the rest of the organization goes. Would you agree with that? Or is that another area of pushback?
I say yes. And so, okay, when we say that it's not the CEO's fault, why isn't it?
Everything. No, what I mean is because the individual CEO may not have the bias that or the unconscious bias now is conscious. What are you going to do about it?
They might have the bias, but they lead the organization.
Correct.
And so when we talk about influence, right, which is part of driving that. So I'm not saying that they are personally biased, but if you're responsible for the organization. So in my prior life, I was a school principal, right? And it was my job to make sure that all of the parts of the school, from community to home to education to all of it, if we didn't meet our test scores or we didn't meet our objectives, they looked at me. Mm-hmm. If my teachers were unhappy, they looked at me. Mm-hmm. If something happened with a child in the classroom, came back to me. And I couldn't say, but I don't think that way. I don't feel that way. I still have to answer for that. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about authority, there's some positional authority.
Yes.
That allows you in that particular space. And then there's some influence that also exists. And I think that I'm not saying that when I say it's the CEO's fault, I'm going to say that they're blamed for everything but I said that if the people in your organization are not listening and not driving change and shifting behaviors, and you don't apply consequence to that.
Yes.
So
there it is.
You're not responsible for their behavior. You do own is there's a consequence for that behavior, and that behavior is allowed to persist, because people do not leave businesses, organizations, and companies, right? They leave managers and bosses and leaders.
Yes. But that's been a problem forever, whether it's diversity or whether somebody didn't follow up on their responsibility. Lack of consequence hits across everything in an organization, which is another issue that has been out there forever. So even though we've identified that, just like we've identified its individual egos, how are you going to get around it?
So one of the things that I've done in my work, and I share this, is that IDE or DEI is the egg in the batter, not the icing or sprinkles on the cake. And eggs are binders. It binds you for business objectives. It binds you for productivity, for people, for processes. It is a binder, right? That diversity, that equity, and that inclusion, it's a binder. And it's a leadership competency. Mm-hmm. I do not talk about DEI without it being a leadership competency, because then we're talking about inclusive leadership. If I am going to lead my population inclusively, here are the behaviors that go with it. And I am responsible for everyone in there, because I'm creating an ecosystem of belonging. So I shift the language when I'm having conversations with my leaders and I'm speaking on this topic. I don't make it separate. See, one of the shifts in the space is that tie it back into leadership competency. This is about leadership. Yes. This is not just about throwing something on the side, because guess what? If I do not like anchovies on my pizza, I take them off. But if you don't have a crust, you don't have a pizza.
Well. Community, everybody's got to go to Dr. Deena's mind. Dr. Deena, I love everything, the way you just put it out there. And most importantly, community, if you don't remember anything else from this series of real conversations Conversations from the C-Suite with Dr. Deena. Please remember this: belonging is an ecosystem. And as we know, just in terms of nature, if one piece of the ecosystem is missing, it throws everything off. And the most important thing, Dr. Deena, tell us, what is the most important element in your belonging ecosystem that if it's not there, throws everything off?
You.
Yeah.
You.
Yeah.
Your value add. Each of us adds our own brand of magic to the equation. We bring a host of experiences and knowledge. And that's the beauty of diversity, whether it's diversity of thought, complexion, hair, and all of those things and ideals. We bring that. And as we begin to build, you are the key thing. You are important. The same when we talked about the whole AI piece. You are the critical piece in AI integration. You are the whole one in this ecosystem of belonging that's there. So when you realize that you're your own very brand of magic, that's when you truly understand that when you exclude, okay, any aspect of that, then there's something missing.
Yes. And on that note, community, I'm going to remind you that what makes you different makes you valuable. And Dr. Deena has reminded us that in terms of the belonging ecosystem, if one piece is missing, it throws everything off. That one piece is you. Dr. Deena Brown, thank you so much for joining me this month on this very special series of Real Conversations from the C-Suite, celebrating the 4th of July and independent thought. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Community, please go back and listen to this series again. There is something about the words of Dr. Deena that move me every time I have an opportunity to engage with her. If you sit and think about it long enough, I'm sure you'll be moved just as well to not only think differently, but do differently. When we know better, we do better. And I hope that's what you'll walk away with from this series. To hear any of these podcasts again, please go to the website, drnita.com. Remember to spell out the word doctor, and at the top, click the link that says Keep It a Real Podcast. And while you're there, check out my services and my resources. Please, community, get in the flow. If no other time of the year, get in the flow after this series. Follow, like, and overshare this series of podcasts that help you reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. Please share them with your network. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.